Before you hear another word from me, I need you to understand something. I am not a man who scares easily. I have sat in black sites in countries that do not officially exist. I have read intelligence files that were classified above top secret and then buried under designations with no public name. I have looked dangerous men in the eye and felt nothing but professional calm. But on a cold April morning in 2024, 4 stories beneath the Vatican's secret archive, I watched a materials scientist with 20 years of experience and a voice like a university lecture hall put down her instruments, step back from a document that was several centuries old, and say in a voice barely above a whisper, "James, these were not written by human hands." And the most terrifying part was not what she said. It was that every person in that chamber already knew it. We had known it from the moment we walked in. We had just been waiting for someone with enough credentials to say it out loud. My name is James Calvin Holt. I am 61 years old. I served 22 years in the United States Army, the last 9 in military intelligence, and what I found beneath the Vatican's secret archive is something the world was never supposed to know. I am telling you anyway, because 3 of the men who were with me that day are no longer reachable, and I am still here, and I still have a voice. I was born in Macon, Georgia, the son of a Methodist minister named Robert Holt, who preached in the same small church for 38 years. My father was a gentle and unhurried man who held his Bible in both palms like something fragile and alive, and who answered every hard question his congregation brought him, not with certainty, but with love. I worshipped him when I was small. By the time I was 19 and shipping out, I had quietly decided that everything he believed was a comfort system, a beautiful and human way, and ultimately fictional way, of bearing a universe that didn't care. I never said that to his face. He knew anyway. Fathers always know. And still, every single week for 22 years, Robert Holt wrote his son a letter about the town, about the weather, about a bird at the kitchen window, small things. I understand now that they were holy things. I understand too late. My father died in 2019 while I was on assignment overseas. I did not get home in time. I stood in his empty church the morning after his funeral and felt the particular grief of a man who spent decades keeping a door closed and is now standing in front of it, knowing it will never open again from the other side. I sealed that grief the way I sealed everything, professionally, completely, and I went back to work. I carried that sealed thing inside me for 5 years before the Vatican cracked it open. The assignment came in March of 2024 through a man I will call Director Ashworth, which is not his name. He told me that a joint task force involving the Department of Defense and the Vatican's Pontifical Commission for Sacred Archaeology discovered a collection of documents during a structural renovation of the archive's lowest storage level, a level sealed since the early 19th century.
He told me the documents required assessment by someone with both authentication experience and an active intelligence background. He told me they were significant. In intelligence, significant is the word people use when the truth is too large for ordinary language. I flew to Rome on a Thursday. I walked through the Vatican on a Tuesday morning in early April when the city was soft with spring light and the stone was warm and the whole ancient place looked like evidence that human beings were capable of building things that lasted. Then we went underground, and the city above disappeared like a dream you can't hold on to after waking. The public areas of the Vatican archive are known to scholars worldwide. What is not publicly known is that beneath those accessible levels, there are chambers that the Vatican's own geological assessment, which I reviewed as part of my briefing documents, cannot fully account for. The stonework in those lower chambers does not match any documented construction period in Roman or early Christian architectural history. The masonry geometry, the stone composition, the structural technique, none of it belongs to any civilization our historians have formally catalogued. Whatever those chambers were, they were not built by the institution that eventually settled above them. They were already there, waiting. The corridor leading to the document chamber was approximately 40 meters long and carved from a single continuous stone in a way that modern engineering would find extraordinarily difficult to replicate. The air in that corridor had a quality I cannot fully describe, except to say that it felt intentional, not stale the way sealed underground spaces usually feel, alive in some way that made the hairs on my forearms rise before I had seen a single page. The chamber itself was roughly circular, about 15 meters across, with a domed ceiling that rose to a point at its center. In the middle of the chamber, on a stone table that appeared to be part of the floor itself rather than placed upon it, were the documents. There were 93 pages. I am going to tell you what Dr. Linda Chen, materials conservation specialist from the Smithsonian Institution, determined about those pages, and I need you to stay with me through this because the details matter. The pages were not papyrus, not vellum, not parchment derived from any animal source her instruments could identify. The substrate was organic in origin, but matched nothing in her reference database. Not human tissue, not animal hide, not any plant fiber in any classification she could map. She ran her analysis 4 times over 2 days using spectrographic tools, carbon sampling equipment, and fiber microscopy, and every single result came back the same: unknown origin. The preservation of the pages defied the chamber's environmental conditions completely. There was no temperature regulation down there, no humidity control, no hermetic sealing. Those pages should have been powder. Instead, they were perfect. But the most significant thing, the thing that made Dr. Chen step back from her instruments and speak in that quiet, shattered voice, was the writing itself. Under high-powered magnification, the text showed no evidence of tool contact with the page surface, no pen stroke compression, no brush drag, no stylus indentation, no ink layering consistent with any known application method. The text appeared to have formed from within the material itself, emerging from the substrate the way a bruise emerges from beneath skin, from the inside outward. 20 years of material science, and she had no framework for what she was looking at. She said it quietly, and she said it once, and she did not say it again. These were not written by human hands. The chamber was completely silent after that. Not the silence of people choosing not to speak, the silence of people who have just felt the floor shift beneath them and are waiting to see if it will hold. The writing covered all 93 pages in multiple languages across what appeared to be multiple historical periods: ancient Latin, early Aramaic, a form of Greek that our linguist Dr. Farrow estimated predated classical Greek by at least 1,000 years. And then, beginning on page 47 and continuing without interruption to the final page in plain and unmistakable modern American English. I want you to feel the weight of that. A document whose materials cannot be sourced, whose writing was produced by no instrument science can identify, whose preservation violates every known principle of organic decay, shifting from ancient languages into the English I grew up speaking in Georgia, as if whatever produced it knew we were coming, as if it had been waiting to be understood.
The content of the English section was not what I expected. There were no dramatic proclamations, no apocalyptic warnings in the theatrical style that the word prophecy usually suggests. It read more like a record, a careful, patient, extraordinarily detailed record of human history, written from a perspective that was clearly not human. It described events across centuries with the tone of someone watching a long and difficult process unfold, not with cruelty, not with indifference, with the particular quality of attention that belongs to someone who understands what they are watching better than the participants do, and has chosen, for reasons the document did not fully explain, to allow the process to continue at its own pace. It described wars not as catastrophes, but as pressures, economic collapses not as failures, but as corrections, moments of collective human suffering described with a precision and a compassion that coexisted in a way I had never encountered in any document produced by human intelligence. And woven through the historical record, quietly and consistently, were references to individuals, not leaders, not generals or presidents or men of obvious historical consequence, ordinary people, teachers, farmers, preachers in small southern churches who held their Bibles in both palms and told their children that God was building something with the broken pieces. On page 53, the document addressed me directly. I need you to understand that I do not mean it addressed someone like me, or addressed my profession, or addressed a type of person I resembled. It addressed me, James Calvin Holt. It described my mother's classroom. It described the way my father held his Bible. It described a September morning in 1972 when I was 9 years old and asked my father why God let bad things happen to good people. And my father sat on the back porch steps and was quiet for a long time before he said, "Jimmy, I think the question isn't why he allows it. I think the question is what he is building with it." I had never written those words in any file. I had never spoken them to any colleague or friend. That memory existed in one place on this earth, and that place was inside me. And now it was on a page that predated the English language in its modern form by centuries. I did not stand. I did not speak. I sat down on the stone floor of that chamber, and I pressed my palms flat against the cold ground, and I breathed. And in the breathing, I felt something I had not felt since I was a boy in my father's church, the feeling that something very large and very patient was present in the room and was not indifferent to me. The final pages of the document were addressed to whoever was reading them in that moment, not as a warning, not as a command, as a completion. They said that the question humanity had been arguing in its temples and laboratories and courtrooms for centuries was not the real question. The real question was whether humanity would become worthy of the conversation. And then the document said something I have turned over in my mind every single day since April of 2024. It said that the ones who prepared the way were never the powerful or the certain. They were the quiet ones, the ones who sat on back porch steps with their children and answered the hardest questions, not with doctrine, but with love. It said those people always knew, and it said they were never, not once, not for a single moment of their lives, alone. My father knew, Robert Holt of Macon, Georgia, who preached for 38 years in a small church and wrote his soldier son a letter every week without fail and held his Bible like something alive and answered his boy's hardest question on a September morning with patience and love. He knew. He carried that knowing his whole life, and he tried to give it to a son who wasn't ready to receive it. And something that existed before human history, that produced documents in no human hand, on no human material, in a chamber beneath the oldest institution in the Western world, remembered him, remembered what he said.
Thought it was worth keeping across centuries. I came home from Rome in late April. I sat on my back porch in Northern Virginia, and I looked at the sky,
and I talked to my father for the first time since he died. I don't know if he heard me. I only know it was the most honest thing I had done in years. And I know that whatever wrote those pages in that chamber, whatever has been watching this species find its way through the dark with such extraordinary patience, it did not remember the powerful. It remembered the gentle. It remembered the quiet. It remembered a preacher who held things carefully and loved without condition and never once stopped writing letters to a son who took too long to write back. If that is not the most important thing I have ever told you, then I don't know what is. My name is James Calvin Holt. This is my testimony. I am at peace. If this story reached something inside you that most things don't reach, if it touched a grief or a memory or a love you usually keep quiet, then you are exactly who this channel was made for. Subscribe to the 11th Hour Last Words right now. Every week we bring you the stories that live in the space between what we can prove and what we cannot stop feeling. Hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment below telling us where you are listening from tonight. Share this with someone who needs to hear it before it is too late. Because some stories only find the people who were always meant to hear them. We will see you at the 11th hour. This story carries lasting value on multiple levels simultaneously. At its human core, it is a story about a son who armored himself so thoroughly against feeling that he missed the quiet wisdom of his father until the door closed forever. A wound that tens of millions of older Americans carry without ever finding permission to grieve it openly. The Vatican archive setting gives the story historical and institutional weight, while keeping its emotional truth entirely personal and intimate. The non-human hands revelation functions not as science fiction, but as a mirror, forcing the protagonist and the viewer to confront the possibility that the quiet, faithful people they dismissed or overlooked in their own lives were carrying genuine and ancient knowledge. Educationally, the story raises serious questions about the limits of material science, the nature of historical records, the centuries-long human debate between empirical evidence and spiritual experience, and the profound possibility that ordinary, loving people have always been the true keepers of something important. It delivers its moral without requiring any specific religious belief. It asks only this: do not wait. Do not keep the door closed. The people who love you quietly are the ones that history, and perhaps something older than history, remembers most carefully. Call them while you still can.